what we're hearing is that there's billions and billions of dollars out there chasing clean energy, clean technology. And we have this clean technology ready to go and deploy and scale up if we can. The big question in my mind is this actually money that's interested in getting rid of carbon dioxide? Or is this money that's interested in investing in ways that feel good to the people that contributed the money?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 40 of the Rose Bros podcast. This episode, we are joined by Mike Belenkie, president of Advantage Oil and Gas, a mid-sized Canadian energy company with a market cap of around $400 million, currently listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. Mike is a pretty interesting guy, as he was an Olympian at the 2000 Sydney Olympics, where he competed in the sport of rowing for Team Canada. He's also an engineer, scientist, and entrepreneur, having previously founded Modern Resources, a private energy company which achieved commercial success. Along with his business and athletic career, his wife and family enjoy skiing in Fernie, where he is also working to create a land trust that aims to set aside thousands of forest acres for future use in the Fernie area. We covered a lot of subjects in this episode, including how carbon credits and carbon capture work, the future of clean energy, setting up a land trust, and a lot more. Enjoy! Mike Belenkie, thank you for sitting down. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here today.
You are the president of Advantage Oil and Gas, but you are also an Olympian. That's pretty cool.
Well, thank you for saying so. It's funny you bring up the Olympian thing right at the start, which is quite timely because 20 years ago, yesterday, is when I was sitting at the Olympics watching my now wife compete as well.
That is cool.
And it was only 20 years ago, a week ago, the opening ceremonies were for those games.
And anyone listening, you competed in the rowing at Sydney year 2000?
Sydney 2000, yep.
And what did your wife do?
She's a synchro swimmer. I hadn't actually met her before the games.
Okay.
A bit of a neat story. We're both born and raised in Calgary. And at the time, she was living in Toronto and I was living in Victoria at our respective training centers. So we actually met in Sydney, Australia, started dating 4 months later in Calgary, and the rest is history.
And here we are. That was a little while ago. In the meantime, you've become the president of Advantage Oil and Gas. What is Advantage Oil and Gas, and what do you guys do?
So Advantage Oil and Gas is simply a clean energy company, clean Canadian energy company. Our mission, as we sort of talk internally, is to deliver clean Canadian energy to the world. As much as we've had a bit of a rough run here in Calgary and in Canadian energy for a number of years now, we think that we're as good as anybody in the world at delivering clean energy. And that's something we try to be quite proud of and make sure we think of that as being more than just a job, but also a purpose. It's a part of being a solution to the global challenges by doing it well and doing it responsibly.
Advantage would be natural gas weighted then? Is that the idea?
That's right. We're 90% gas, and the rest is condensate and oil. We have a Montney asset. Montney zone is a very prolific zone that sort of spans the Alberta-BC border. It's gas, condensate, and oil. It's huge. It's a world-class play. And Advantage is probably in its current sort of iteration. Advantage is about a decade old since we became a pure-play Montney company. And we're 45,000 barrels of oil equivalent per day, which it puts us kind of in the middle of the mid-cap space. Our corporate value is about $750 million, so sizable for a normal company, but in terms of oil and gas, we're sort of small to mid.
How has the energy collapse been for you guys? Has it been tough? Has it been smooth sailing?
Yeah, so actually the collapse that you're probably referring to the COVID collapse, I imagine.
And then 2015 when everything went downhill.
I was a different company in 2015, and we were again gas weighted. That collapse that you talked about in 2015 was more oil again, and again probably driven by sort of anti-competitive practices from OPEC mostly.
Yep.
And again, this one started with that, with OPEC and Russia having a price battle, and again, COVID came along further and destroyed demand. I think more importantly, as a gas company, you do have some isolation from oil prices. Mm-hmm. Gas is often thought of as being just a sort of another version of oil. Nowadays, people think of high oil pricing as being bad for gas. That's because most oil that's being developed right now comes with a ton of associated gas. what we saw down in Texas, in a number of different places around the world. We've seen a lot of gas coming that was kind of a byproduct, and that extra supply of associated gas drove down gas prices. So with oil shrinking now, gas prices are actually rising. So the bumpiness that we saw through the summer here in oil pricing and in gas pricing was predictable, but the more substantial, more structural kind of change is that gas prices are actually looking pretty good into this winter and through next year. Advantage is left somewhat kind of neutral in the big picture that way.
And so you guys are actually making money.
Yep, we continue to make money. We've always been a conservative company, so we've invested in infrastructure first to keep costs low and to keep control of our assets. So when times have been bad, and times have been bad in gas for most of the last 10 years, times have been bad, we've been sort of skating by on low costs and high-quality reservoir, high-quality assets, basically. Now that things are looking stronger for the winter, we actually kind of think of this as being one of those brief moments in time where Advantage has got a great story to tell that should hopefully deliver higher growth than most of our competitors in the gas space, and certainly than most of our competitors in the oil space as well.
Do you ever get frustrated trying to sell the natural gas story, or has it been a lot easier these days?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I mean, absolutely frustrated for sure. There's a great quote from the movie The Big Short. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen
Dr.
that?
Michael Burry for sure.
Yeah, where he says, Michael Burry, he's being accosted by one of his investors, his major investors, and his investor's like, I want my money back. And Michael Berry says, well, I'm not wrong. Yeah. I'm just early. And his investor starts screaming, being early is the same as being wrong. So, I mean, it's a classic quote. I think about it all the time because I've kind of had a call on gas for the last 20 years. I've been a believer in natural gas as being the ultimate natural fuel for the modern economy. I mean, I do believe that there's lots of different fuels that are important, including also renewable energy is very, very important. We want to see as much as we can of that. But I see natural gas as being this incredibly good fuel that's super clean burning, super high efficiency, very low carbon emissions. And when done the Canadian way, when done responsibly, there's also very few fugitive emissions like methane or other problems that come along. And the impact on the land of the Montney is quite low because the resource is so dense that you have very small surface facilities too. As far as the fuel goes, love the fuel, believe the fuel is the fuel of the future for the next 50 years. And it's painful to watch the complexity around the international markets trying to skip past an obvious solution to all of our emissions problems. You know, there was a good piece of data that I can't, unfortunately, I don't have the reference for it, but basically if you were to switch all the coal-powered natural gas, all the coal-powered generation globally to natural gas-powered generation, you would have already met your Paris commitments globally.
Really?
Today. The technology is here, and all we got to do is share that gas around the world. So that's our mission. As we talk about this with Advantage, we actually intend to be a part of that solution, and it's kind of slow to happen, that's all.
Is it night and day better than coal? Natural gas?
Yeah, it's twice as efficient. There's half the emissions that coal has. So if you take a coal plant, you shut it down, and then you start up a natural gas-fired plant next door, you've instantly reduced your emissions by half for all that energy. Right out of the gates.
That's pretty obvious.
Yeah, so it's a pretty obvious. We get lumped in with oil and gas and with coal because it's a fossil fuel, but it's very different than coal for sure, and still much more efficient than using oil or any type of petroleum product to try and replace coal. So broadly speaking, the world's sort of seen it. LNG is growing rapidly, and we're delivering LNG to all parts of the world now. In North America, we're going to have 12 BCF per day of LNG exports very soon, but we need a lot more than that. Really, you need to replace a massive coal infrastructure, which is growing and growing and growing in Asia, especially so China, India, Korea, Japan.
So even if the world does move towards electricity, which it seems it kind of is, electricity doesn't grow on trees, right? So natural gas is a way to create electricity.
Natural gas is basically the big winner in that whole progression, electrification.
So Tesla's good for you guys.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I mean, I'd love to have. I do like to drive. I mean, I drive to the mountains on the weekends in cold weather, so an electric car doesn't suit me very much. But when the time comes and electric cars have enough range to get me to and from a ski day, then I'll have an electric car. I mean, quieter, high power, that kind of stuff. It's a fantastic evolution, and eventually I will have one for sure. Yeah.
So you're not worried about Teslas of the world and Nikola's of the world and all that. Like, that's a good thing for you guys.
I mean, certainly wouldn't worry about Tesla. I worry about Nikola because it appears to be fraudulent. Did you see that report?
He resigned,
Did you see the Hindenburg report?
The short seller,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe not that guy. But in general, the technology is, a lot of oil companies worry about that. But advantage being natural gas,
right?
Your supplier electricity.
Right. So. Yeah, actually, just last night, I don't know if you noticed this. Is this a coincidence? Last night we announced that we...
I read that, yeah.
We just did a 10-year gas supply agreement to a brand new gas-fired power gen station just outside of Chicago. And that gas-fired power gen station is going to supply enough power for 1.2 million homes. Now, we're not the only supplier of gas, but we're probably, 1/5 of the way there. So you put what looks like 2 warehouse-sized buildings on a plot of land, you supply it with natural gas, and you power 1.2 million homes, and with 100% reliability, with essentially 100% reliability.
It's pretty good.
And we're part now. We can proudly say we're part of that project, and that project, of course, is going to displace coal-fired power generation in that district. So we're playing an important part of reducing a massive amount of emissions just with that alone.
What's your opinion on fossil fuels taking carbon out of the ground and putting it into the atmosphere? So at the end of the day, unless you somehow capture that carbon, we're still putting it into the atmosphere.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people think about the whole combustion kind of game and emissions game as being a binary game. It's a on or off. Reality is that there's no likelihood in humanity, certainly in the next 50 years, that we stop burning things. It just can't happen. That the exchange, the trade-off of not burning fossil fuels and other things for energy is that people die in the cold, they starve, you can't grow enough food. 7+ billion people, or what are we getting, close to 8 billion people, you just can't keep people warm, you can't feed them, you can't transport them without burning, without summoning energy from something, right? And even to make a solar panel, it requires a bunch of coal and natural gas, as well as sand. So life, the way we live it, which is longer life expectancy, healthier, better education, more quality, these things all depend on a functioning economy, and a functioning economy of this level requires natural gas and burning things. I
was watching Elon Musk on Joe Rogan. I'm sure you've seen that.
You're talking about the time when he smoked a spliff?
Joe Rogan. That one. But so his comment was that the way we're pursuing fossil fuel energy supply is the dumbest experiment ever, because we're just taking carbon from the ground and putting it in the atmosphere. But at the same time, there's just no alternative, right? Yeah,
well, I mean, you can't hold it against him. He's talking his own book, right? Like, for him, he wants everything to be battery powered, which is, that's a great goal. Sadly,
it's just not possible.
It's not really a constructive message, because even his batteries, the energy content in each one of his batteries for a car, it takes the same amount of energy to make those batteries, mine them, find the ore, melt it down, transport it, pay the people to haul it around, build the conveyor belts, and then to actually manufacture the batteries. It takes like 7 years worth of energy that a car would exert on its own. So everything we do requires energy. In fact, entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, says that everything we do that's creating order in the universe requires energy. And if over time, that energy has to return to the ground. So if you think about all the carbon that's in the ground, where'd it come from? For sure. It was plant matter, mostly, that happened after this incredible explosion of life that happened when the world was a lot hotter and there's a lot more carbon dioxide in the air. So this is part of a natural cycle. This is carbon that started out as life, that got buried, compressed, heated up, and turned into these fossil fuels. So, I mean, your question, you talk about the cycle. Here we are creating products, energy, food, transportation, roofs over our heads, and of course, without overselling it, if everywhere you look, the more energy we have, the more energy that society has, the more equality you have, the longer your life expectancy is, the lower your infant mortality is, the more sort of gender equality there is. This is uniform across the world. Without actually doing that, you're actually picking a whole separate challenge. You're taking a separate challenge on. So I think for us, the challenge is, how do we do this in a way that actually creates the most stable system. So the way we see it at Advantage, the way I see it in my career as well, in the end, I'm a scientist, being an engineer.
That's why I'm asking you, yeah.
Is that we produce energy, and in producing energy, we create emissions. Well, we also are good at capturing those emissions. So Advantage specifically, we have a carbon capture project at our plant, which has been operating for about 10 years. And it's registered with the government of Alberta, and we actually receive carbon credits for that project. And so we become experts at not just producing the energy, but also returning the carbon to the ground. So when Musk talks about taking carbon out of the ground and putting it in the air, he's kind of skipping past the fact that building his vehicles emits an incredible amount of carbon that is not being captured currently. I think, to me, the better solution is, as we create an impact on the earth, we try and mitigate that impact. And what we're doing is we're capturing our carbon dioxide and putting it down on the ground. Now it's becoming clear that carbon pricing is here to stay, and that's actually an important part to creating that solution. And so Advantage is working on a very large project where, if it's economic, if we can make this thing fly, we would install full carbon capture on our plants, capture it, and then inject it 3 kilometers underneath the earth and store it permanently in an aquifer, basically a porous zone in the rock. And in doing that, we become a zero emissions energy producer. So a fantastic project, and all it really requires is for us to be able to get the cost down low enough that the carbon revenue that we receive from the carbon credits will eventually pay back that investment. Otherwise, you can't afford to do this stuff. So I think carbon pricing in the big picture is a good thing. Yeah.
I was reading an article yesterday. It was Bill Gates, and he called it the carbon premium or the green premium, and that's effectively the price you're paying for green alternatives. Mm-hmm. That would probably apply to what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so in some ways, I think what's happening right now is that there's an ideological green premium where entrepreneurs and companies that are out there trying to do things that are driven by the ideology of getting away from fossil fuels get a big premium because there's a real feel-good aspect to that investment, right? And you actually see this in the carbon credit world. There's 3 different types of carbon credits. One is the compliance market carbon credits, so in Alberta right now we pay $30 per ton. If you store a ton of carbon dioxide, you get a $30 credit. It's as good as cash. The other 2 types are similar but not the same. The most basic one is the voluntary carbon market. And the voluntary carbon market basically is where you go to a philanthropist and you say, if you give me $3 per ton, I will take that money and I will find a project in Namibia or in Kathmandu where I can spend that money and I can actually eliminate the emissions of 1 ton for $3 per ton. And these are actually voluntary carbon credits. And it's, of course, very complicated because how do you make sure no one takes advantage of that, really, right? Yeah. These things that are driven by ideology become more complicated when they have to become practical.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's a huge industry out there that's creating these projects, raising money around them, soliciting money, and to go with that, you have auditors, evaluators, validators to make sure the projects that the money is being deployed appropriately, not just skimmed, really, right? Because how do you know? You can't see that carbon go away. Mm-hmm. You have to trust someone. So that's the voluntary market, and the one that's in between, that is the best example of what you're talking about, the green premium, the Bill Gates green premium, is that there's these things called charismatic carbon credits, and they are still in the voluntary market, but very specifically, they're not the lowest cost investments per ton. And there's examples where if you buy. An investor can buy, or a donor, a philanthropist can buy into a project that they love because it's a really feel-good project, like buying a forest that's being shredded in Brazil, a rainforest that really feels like an awful thing that's happening, and they want to prevent that from happening. So you get the carbon value, the value of sequestering extra carbon, or the incremental tained carbon sequestered. But you also get that kind of positive feeling that your $1 million helped prevent a certain disaster, ecological disaster somewhere. And in a lot of cases, even though it may be more expensive to do projects in places like that on a per ton basis, it's still worth it to some people.
Right.
As that green premium. In a lot of cases, that can be worth sort of 5 times as much as a base level voluntary credit.
Long story short, in layman's terms, right now, what's happening is that some of these projects aren't necessarily I don't know what the right word is. You have to pay extra for these projects to work. But the article I was reading, getting back to Bill Gates, is that hopefully that extra premium that we have to pay or that carbon tax rebate we get back from the government eventually will go away, right? Like that's the goal, is to get these projects to market prices.
Yeah, so that, well, I mean, I think really no one person has the answer on that, of course, right? But I think that a functioning market, so the Nobel Prize for economics was awarded to a guy that actually posited that a carbon tax is the best way to deal with emissions globally, if applied equally across jurisdictions and in a fair way. Now, the challenge right now is, of course, carbon taxes are not universal, so it's not being applied in a fair way, but the concept is still there, which is put a price on every ton that you emit, and when the price gets high enough, it incentivizes innovation.
Exactly.
It disincentivizes waste.
Right.
So the way we see it, at $30 a ton, we're probably not going to make any material amount of money on carbon sequestration.
Okay.
But at $50 a ton, we can make all our money back and a positive return. And so that basically is creating carbon as a commodity. Negative carbon, really, more specifically, is the commodity. So we can sequester at our plants what ends up being around 150,000 tons per year and get paid $7 or $8 million a year. We think we can make revenue off of that, just like we make revenue by investing money in a well and selling the gas for $3 per MCF. And there's no, because you get that level of carbon pricing, eventually the level of carbon pricing should settle at a spot where it's incentivizing enough of this behavior to accomplish the goals that the government's trying to accomplish.
Right, or not need it at all. I mean, maybe one day you won't even need a carbon tax, where the projects will have just gotten to the place in the market where you don't need government incentive.
So, I'd be surprised. I'd be surprised if that ever happened, and that's because it's for the same reason that communism failed. Really, what it is an anti-waste tax, right? That in a way, carbon pricing is basically saying every carbon that you emit to the air is waste.
Or a tax on society.
Right. If you don't disincentivize that waste, people will do the lowest cost thing. And we know for a fact that the lowest cost thing is to burn whatever you got into the atmosphere. And that's why there's still hundreds and hundreds of coal plants under construction right now worldwide. It's still happening. Why is it happening? Is it because China and India don't know about the carbon issue?
Yeah.
No, it's because it's way cheaper and way more secure too for them.
Long story short, natural gas is probably one of the best fossil fuels. Well, it is the best fossil fuel for a greener energy supply going forward.
I think it's nature's best fuel, and I think it's actually a really critical, like a fundamental part of the energy mix for the world until you start to see the population shrink.
Which is not going to happen.
And frankly, I'm no nuclear advocate, but nuclear is the only option to stop burning things. I mean, if you look around the world, I mean, the people that wanted to get off oil and natural gas have turned to burning wood pellets, which is way worse for the environment. Right? In fact, they've traced a lot of those wood pellets have been traced back to the Amazon, the Brazilian Amazon forest. So they're cutting down the Amazon forest and shipping wood pellets to places like Northeast United States and to England, so they can avoid oil and natural gas. It's crazy.
Do you ever worry there's just too much natural gas or advantage to be profitable? It just seems like there's so much natural gas out there.
No, I mean, I don't worry about it being not a going concern. I mean, it's a real business, absolutely, right? We're a small company. We have 2 trillion cubic feet of reserves. Frankly, it's not that there's too much of it for it to be a business. It's that there's too much of it for there to be windfall profits. So basically, when prices get to a certain level, everybody and their dog can go out and drill natural gas wells and dump that supply into the market, which suppresses the price. So it's the old fundamental economics, right? The Adam Smith, the invisible hand that Adam Smith talked about, right? And when prices go high, you incentivize drilling. As drilling goes high, your supply goes up. Your supply starts to exceed your demand. Then prices go down. It's a self-governing kind of situation. I think that the trick in a true commodities business that has excess supply and too little capital is to be the most efficient at it. And that's what we do. We try to be the most efficient at it. And that argument, by the way, that goes for carbon pricing too. If carbon credits go to a certain level, and then all of a sudden people are decreasing carbon emissions to the point where we no longer need to worry about it, then carbon pricing can come down and there's less incentive to decrease emissions.
Right. And also you guys, on a side note, you're looking at carbon capture technology, which is kind of forefront stuff. So you're kind of getting ahead of the puck like we were talking about.
Well, so lots of people do carbon capture on, I shouldn't say lots, but there are a number of sort of international scale carbon projects that are already up and running. Shell's got one called Quest here in Alberta. There's several coal-fired power gen stations that have it, North Dakota, Saskatchewan, and all over the United States. And they're doing a number of them in Europe as well. But no one's doing them right now in mid-sized industrial projects like what we're working on right now. And that's the challenge, is making it economic. So we can actually take investors' money, build a project, collect the carbon credits, pay them back, and give them a return.
So what is carbon capture? How does that work?
So it's actually quite simple. So our design, our version of carbon capture, is that we will basically capture all the emissions from the compressors, anything we're burning, any boilers, and we'll take that carbon, we'll pipe it together into a number of vessels. You have to scrub out all the impurities, water, oxygen, nitrogen, which are all, of course, elemental, in the atmosphere already. And then what's left behind is carbon dioxide. So you scrub the carbon dioxide out, you capture it, you pressurize it up, and then you pump it down a well.
Oh, I see.
So the process that's based on is an amine process, basically a chemical that clings to carbon dioxide. So you bubble the exhaust stream that you're creating as you burn the natural gas that's used to power this process, all these processes. You capture it, you bubble it through this amine, and then the amine captures it, and then you boil it, the amine, the carbon dioxide comes off in a pure form.
And then you put it back down underground then at the end of it.
Absolutely. You pump it into a pipe and it goes down underground. So all this is, I'm probably oversimplifying a bit.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Frankly, it's a process that's well understood, but to be able to do it in an economic way, to be able to build the project in an economic way, to deal with the sequestration, drilling a well and pumping it into a highly permeable interval of rock. It's all quite complicated, and you have to have a unique combination of skill sets to do it.
To make money at the end of the day. I mean, that's the tricky part. I'm sure there is, I just read about all the money that's out there right now that's just kind of waiting for green projects. Have you found it kind of easy to sell this idea to investors? Or?
Well, we're still early in the process here of developing this business, this part of the business. We have our base capture project up and running because we have to as a part of treating our gas. So that part is all out of the way, and it sort of pays for itself. The carbon capture as a specific business, brand new. We're through the engineering phase. We're about a year into the engineering. We're working on the regulatory piece and about to go into the financing piece. And really what it requires is that everyone that's involved is like-minded. And what we're hearing is that there's billions and billions of dollars out there chasing clean energy, clean technology. And we have this clean technology ready to go and deploy and scale up if we can. The big question in my mind is this actually money that's interested in getting rid of carbon dioxide? Or is this money that's interested in investing in ways that feel good to the people that contributed the money more so? So
interesting.
That's my worry. I kind of feel like it'll be a blend of the two, and I think there is a lot of legitimate money out there that wants to invest in basically cleaning up the emissions profile of any industry, because this is applicable to almost any industry that has a smokestack. So more to come on that, I suppose. We'll
cool.
learn more soon.
That seems like something you could go to anybody with. Amazon has a huge clean tech fund.
Well, the challenge that I'm worried about is that if you're coming out of Calgary as an energy company with a affiliation with oil and gas, then investors who have been raised believing that oil and gas is the enemy may feel like, no, we'll do anything we can to avoid going back to those guys who've been fueling the Industrial Revolution. Right here we are. We've really fueled progress. We've become the enemy somehow out of really lack of public relations and education. I'm hoping that we all realize that we're all in this together. The best thing to do is to put the money to work where it's most efficient, most economic.
So that brings up another question. I was reading this book right now. It's called The Outsiders, and it's all about capital allocation. As an executive, obviously one of your jobs is capital allocation. So in these projects, when you're trying to decide which projects get money, are the returns okay? Or how does that fall into your decisions?
We'll find out soon, really.
Okay.
I mean, certainly our investors at Advantage, and we have very long-term fundamental investors in the company. They've been very strong supporters of our base business. This is not the kind of business they're chasing. What they're looking for is within their portfolios, and these are large investment funds, within their portfolios, they need to have a balanced profile of returns for their investors. And they have not invested in Advantage because they want exposure to carbon pricing. They've invested in Advantage because they want exposure to natural gas pricing.
It's that niche.
Very much so. Yeah, and that's why the financial industry is so huge, is because they've broken it down into these smaller problems.
Right.
It's investing well is a huge problem, a huge challenge. So when you have any major challenge, you got to break it down to smaller components, right?
What do you promise these guys? Because it all comes down to numbers, right? Like double-digit returns, or like what do you?
Well, we tend not to think right now, because we're still in scoping economic phase. We're trying not to be too specific on a rate of return, but we think more about simple payouts, unlevered simple payouts. That we think we can get them well under 10 years and perhaps close to 5. And what that looks like for an investor is you have a 5 to 10 year steady income stream for the company that's non-declining, as opposed to oil and gas, which has a natural decline to it. And essentially government-mandated pricing in the compliance markets, as opposed to free market floating natural gas prices, which can be volatile. So you have a much lower risk profile. You have a non-declining revenue stream. And typically, people are more than happy to invest in these for a lower rate of return, sub 10% rate of return. When it comes to clean tech, lots of times, clean tech investors are looking for a minimal rate of return, because they're trying to do these benevolent concessionary kind of credit agreements and investments.
What is your normal hurdle rate at Advantage? Is it
Advantage?
Double digits?
It floats with the price of gas. For most of the last 8 years, you're pretty excited to have to drill a single well that has a rate of return between 50 and 100%. That's just the well alone.
Okay.
Right? And that's when so your rate of return is a way of capturing the life of the project, which is like 50 years, and basically putting it into a single number. So if you took $1 and if you basically said, I'll give you 50% on this, then it would double out a second year, of course. So what we really, I think what's probably the misleading part about a number that's that high is that we have incredibly high infrastructure costs.
Yes.
We have incredibly high corporate costs. Transportation costs, there's risk to go with that. And when you do invest in a major project for gas, oftentimes the price changes over time, so you've got risk to go with it as well, and you have to discount risk further. I mean, our corporate returns, broadly speaking, they're going to be, if you're in the teens, on a normalized basis over a number of years, you're doing very, very well. Our industry on the whole has done very poorly, especially if you look at where we are now and count backwards, because right now we're essentially at an all-time low in the energy markets right now, thanks in a small part to COVID.
Getting back to this book, I was reading about some of these guys you've never heard of, and their annual compounding rate of return over 30 years is like Henry Singleton at Teledyne was like 25% over 30 years.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff.
In your job, that's kind of what you have to do, right?
Well, there were cases. It depends on the window of time that you're operating, of course, right? If you're in oil and gas, you're kind of constrained to that price environment. And if there's a 20-year bull market in oil and gas, you can do pretty well. And there was between 1990 and call it 2010 or 95 and 2015. So during that period of time is when companies like CNRL were built. When I worked at Painted Pony, I came in, the price was $1. I left 3.5 years later, the price is $12.
So it's easy almost. Not easy, but
during certain windows of time, it's easier anyways. It's not easy. During that window of time, very few other companies would have grown at the same pace. When you break it all down, for a guy to do 25% over 30 years is truly spectacular. And it's not luck. Right? You can get lucky for a little while, but that's beyond macro super cycles, right? Not just cycles, but super cycles.
Do you think about this stuff as an executive?
Of course, yeah. To date, I've had very good fortune with my timing. I came in 95, which was the start of a long bull run. I started at Painted Pony in 2008, had a great tear through 2011. Started at Modern Resources. We actually founded Modern Resources in 2012. And when I left in 2017, we were up by about, over a 5-year period. And this is a private company, so very difficult to value. But we were probably up by about 75% over 5 years. So not a bad outcome at a very tough time. And now here at Advantage, I'm actually we're down from the day that I started, which is 2 years ago. So it's definitely one of those. It's very difficult to swim upstream successfely for forever.
That's hopefully where the carbon capture comes in and some of that sort of stuff.
Realistically, carbon capture isn't an aspect of our business that will make or break our returns. It's the macro on gas prices and to a lesser degree on oil prices. The investment in carbon, to me, is more of a proving up the technology, make it economic, and then once it's at a spot where the world is ready, it then becomes a bull market in carbon pricing, I think.
Interesting.
And to try and scale up at that point, it's probably going to happen in a different business model, not with an advantage.
Do you think you might have created a separate company?
Well, yeah, I mean,
rebrand?
if you want to have investors that are interested in that type of investment, yeah, it's got to almost certainly be in a separate company, especially if you're a small company. You do see companies like Chevron, Oxy, to a lesser degree, Exxon. Some European companies are getting quite big in carbon capture sequestration and making large investments in Norway and so on, in England as well, including Drax. But long and short of it, if you're not a huge company with that free cash to invest, that sort of that float to invest in these projects, then it can become a threat to the core business. And we wouldn't want that to happen. Yeah, so you do probably want to keep it outside.
Well, that's awesome. I kind of nerded out there on capital allocation, but it's an interesting subject I've been reading about.
We're talking about an awful lot of finance here for a podcast. It's probably not a finance podcast.
You never know how many people are interested in this sort of thing. You are also involved in a land trust you're trying to set up right now. We can briefly touch on that before we wrap up.
This is again about that carbon pricing thing, right?
Yeah.
Interesting enough. So forests are, if you think about it intuitively, a forest is a great thing to have that simply naturally sequesters carbon dioxide, right? Trees breathe carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen, right? It's naturally carbon sequestration. So every tree you grow is sequestering carbon. Every tree you don't cut down, you're leaving that carbon in that form.
It's easy, yeah.
So it's a great project, and I'm a Fernie guy. I go down to Fernie. Yeah. I'm sort of a part-time Californian. Great biking there in the summertime, great skiing in the wintertime, and it's just a great community. Yeah. And it's a place that I've been a member of the community since mid-90s. I've watched forestry kind of come and go, and most recently the owner of some private lands around Fernie they're harvesting very aggressively and in a way that's actually having a significant negative impact on the town. So I didn't start this up. I was lucky enough to get invited in after the team had been doing some work on it. But we've got a trust called the Elk Valley Regional Land Trust, which is, we're a registered not-for-profit in Canada, and we'll be a charity as soon as our first year is complete for financials.
That's cool.
And what we're going to be doing is raising money. The lands that I'm talking about that are being harvested very aggressively are privately held. So the last thing in the world that I will ever be is a not in my backyard guy, a NIMBY guy, right?
For sure.
NIMBY activism to me is if you want to be a destroyer of value, you want to get in the way of progress, you want to get in the way of creating things, then you're a NIMBY person, right? But if you want to do something that's actually where you're generating value,
put your money where your mouth is,
then you go out there, you put your money where your mouth is. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to raise enough money to actually buy a number of large blocks of land, tens of thousands of acres, outside of Fernie, protect the trails, slow down the process of deforestation, and sequester carbon. And one of the pieces we're hopeful for is that as we slow down the cutting of timber, that we'll get carbon credits to help finance that purchase. So it all goes back to that old same thing, the supply-demand piece. As soon as the value of the demand for carbon sequestration is reflected within carbon pricing, and we can get those carbon credits, then we'll turn around and be able to take that value, capture that forest, protect the forest, and increase the carbon value.
That is cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool.
So, I mean, it's a neat project, too, because it's a small town, the recreational value, the mountains that you're in, the community really feels it when you see deforestation happening aggressively, knocking out tourism, knocking out the outdoor activities and so on.
That's cool. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I greatly appreciate you having me on. I'm flattered that I'm more than happy to be a part of it. Great to be working with you as a local business. You're a member of the business community. And,
Thank you.
Coffee and the podcast here is, I think, promoting great ideas.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Hey, thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you like what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. You can also find our coffee and chocolate there, where we plant one tree for every bag or bar sold through our partnership with One Tree Planted, a cool non-for-profit organization focused on global reforestation. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.